effectively. Let's give her a round of applause.
Hi everyone, my name is Dorothy Phoenix. I'm an independent video game developer at my company Cloudy Heaven Games. I'm also a software engineer, and I tutor students in learning how to program and how to develop video games. So I'm going to be telling you a story today about my first job out of college at a little company called IBM. So this was, as I said, this was my first full-time job out of college and my first project at IBM. It was a government project in which our client was moving online educational course software from an older learning management system, or LMS, to a new Unix-based LMS. It was a third-party system, so it was not owned by IBM or the client. You know, it was produced by another vendor. My role in that was I worked on the development team that repaired the courseware that didn't work on the new system. So if there was a problem with a particular course, it would come to us, the programmers and the testing team, and we would try to fix it and get it back out there. So the team was remote. Most of us worked from home, and we were all across the country. And the actual system was based in Virginia Beach at a government site. The courseware served thousands of students across the world. And everything was going seemingly well until this one course showed up and started mysteriously crashing. Okay, so a little bit about this particular course. It had an online quiz component. So the course might have had a test bank of about 100 or so questions, and at any given time, a student might see only 10 randomly chosen questions, so that if they failed the quiz, you know, they couldn't come back in and cheat by knowing what all the questions were. So the quiz part was where the course was crashing in the live environment for students across the world. And as I mentioned, these were randomly chosen questions, so sometimes it crashed, and other times it didn't. So that made it a bit of a hairy problem. I found out after a team meeting that this was not a new problem. This was kind of like one of the usual suspect courses that kept coming back to us over the course of a couple of years before I even got on the team. So everybody knew about it. Nobody had been able to satisfactorily solve the problem. And guess who was assigned to fix it this time? All right, that's me. Okay, so you might be thinking, okay, first major job, pretty big company. Nobody's been able to solve this problem, and even the senior people on the team haven't been able to do it. So me, the new person on the block, that might be a pretty stressful, overwhelming situation. Now, I'll be honest. Luckily for me, I'm a pretty level-headed, calm person, usually. I'm pretty good at keeping calm. I'm very methodical with the way I approach problem solving. And I hadn't even seen the bug itself, so I mean, there was really no reason for me to panic yet, And I'd studied computer science for about 10 years at that point, so, no problem, right? Okay, so before we talk about why the course was crashing, let me tell you a little bit about how it was to work on this project. So there were two sort of components that made this a little bit more complicated: the system and the process. Okay, so for the system, usually when you have a government contract like this, there is like a test system that the internal testing and development teams they look at all the software before they send it out to the real world. Then there's like the government acceptance system, and then the real production system that's live for real students. And the testing and government accepting systems are sort of like mini clones of this real system. The problem was, when you're going through and trying to repair these courses, it was very slow and often freezing. So think about this. Some of the courses you'd have to go, they could take hours to take, right? And then you're trying to do this and it's crashing, or people can't log onto the system. Pretty frustrating, right? Okay, so now let's talk about the process for actually repairing and uploading courseware to this system. It was pretty involved. Okay, so what did that mean? So for smaller courses, maybe about less than half a gigabyte or so, it wasn't that bad. But for larger courses, you had to upload this often huge course to FTP. And this was an internal FTP server for IBM, so the client did not have access to it. Then someone on the IBM team had to download the course, burn it to CD, and drive on site to the government client and hand it off to a government liaison so that they could upload it, and we would have to wait. So it would be like on Wednesday, everybody had to have their stuff in to be burned. So if you missed the boat, you missed the boat. You know, you had to wait like another week. Starting to make those punch cards and those single computer at the university things look kind of easy, isn't it, huh? All right. So that was a process. There was another thing about this particular project that was a little bit more complicated too. So normally most of the courseware was in Adobe Flash or ActionScript 3. If you're new to coding and you haven't heard of that, don't worry about it. HTML5 pretty much is standing on Flash's neck right now, so you know, other than YouTube, I don't even know where people use it anymore. So most of the time, when we were debugging these courses, we would have access to the source code, the ActionScript 3 source code. So you could go in and directly figure out what the problem was. You know, if it crashed, you could look at the stack trace and see, okay, this line number is where it crashed. All right, but a lot of times course developers are not software developers or programmers. So they use additional software, which in this case, one of the software they use was called Captiva, which allows them to go in, create the course content, you know, usually formatting some text or creating PowerPoints or whatever. And then this Captiva software would export it into an Adobe Flash file that could be uploaded as part of this course. All right, so that means that when I'm going into this thing, I don't have any source code, so I'm going to have to figure out a different approach. So normally, if I'm debugging, here's what I do. First, obtain the source code, obviously. Then try to replicate the problem, get it to crash on my computer. Use the stack trace to find specific line numbers and errors in the code. Fix the code directly based on that information. And then repeat as needed. You know, as for most of you have probably figured out, a lot of times the first fix isn't always the last word on it, right? Okay, so what's next? Can I do that in this case? All right, so I don't have any source code in this case. I don't know how I'm going to replicate the problem because it's such a random issue. No stack trace, can't fix the code directly, and don't even know what to do to repeat, right? So we had to take a different approach. What can I do instead? Okay, so the first thing is usually to look for error messages and logs from the system, but unfortunately, nobody had thought to save any of the logs from these crashes, so that was out. Okay, so the next step is to try to replicate the problem. Okay, so you know, I can do that. I can sit down at my computer and spend hours trying to get it to crash by taking this quiz. Like I mentioned, it was only 10 questions at a time out of 100, so you know that took a little while. Then I could examine and try to fix the course content once the crash happened, right? Okay, so I was able to replicate the problem, and then let's see, was I able to fix it? Not quite. Because what happened was that even on my system, I still didn't get any really good logs. It just said, okay, well, there was a crash, but there was no really good information. So I had to take another stab at modifying the debugging steps. First of all, I looked into the course settings in Captiva and found a way to update the software to get better logs. Okay, so that means I need to try to replicate the problem again, read the new logs, step 4 again, examine, and then try to fix and repeat as needed. I made changes to the course, right? So you know what that means. We have to go through all of this again. So that's like another week. All right, so software is updated. We got it there. Next, we can try to replicate the problem again. Okay, so now I get another crash, and let's see what the logs tell us now. All right, so it tells us that we got some sort of an error message, and it says invalid characters. I don't remember exactly what it was, but the gist of it was that they were invalid characters. And I had no idea what that was, because it all just looked like regular text to me. I didn't see anything invalid, right? So I had to do a bit of research. So what did I do for that? I took the error message and pasted it directly into Google. Then I researched the issue of invalid characters. I mean, I didn't know what I was going to find. I figured maybe being on a Unix system, there was something to do with that, because I'm more of a Windows person. So I researched that. I directly went to Unix forums and the LMS forums and asked, okay, does anybody see anything like this with perfectly normal looking text? So I really went broad and narrow in my research. Okay, fine, I knew what invalid characters were, but I still was stumped because I didn't see any. So I revisited the software settings again and found yet another way to get more verbose logs, which means, again, here we go, another week, all right? Okay, so let's go back to our modified debugging steps and see where we are. Okay, so we're back at number 1. Still didn't get the best logs, found another way to get more verbose logs, and we're back to that again. This is getting pretty annoying, right? Okay, so now we updated again, got better logs, replicated the problem, read the new logs, okay. So now I see something different. You know, I've figured out how to get more information. What did I see? I see that the question text that was crashing was being truncated in the middle of it. But why? So because of my new logs, I had more information that I needed to dig in and figure out what was happening. I could see exactly what text was being sent, but I couldn't see what was wrong with it. So if you've ever used Microsoft Word or Notepad++, there's a setting that allows you to show hidden characters, and that includes things like paragraph tabs and you know, white space and things like that. So this is how you would change a setting in Notepad++ to do something like that. I figured between Notepad++ and Microsoft Word, somebody would tell me something, right? Okay, so this is kind of like what a question text would look like. You have a teammate named Candlejack, and it just disappears. If y'all don't know who Candlejack is, Google him, and you'll see why he's relevant to this situation. Okay, so when I copied and pasted the text directly from Captiva into Word and Notepad++, I saw that there was a little weird invisible white space character right where the text was being truncated. Okay. So there were a lot of white spaces, you know, because there's sentences and words and punctuation and things like that. So why was this one different? Who would even put something like that in there? Well, to find out, I had to remove the invisible white space characters in this question text and see if that solved the problem. So by now, I'd gone through it so many times, I had a set of about 10 questions that I knew crashed, so I could create a custom smaller quiz so that every time I went through this, I was guaranteed to get a crash. So I removed the white space from there and went to see if that solved the problem. So now we're back to this again. All right, another week, okay? So now that we've successfully updated the software again, I took the quiz questions that were breaking, and this time they did not crash, which means that our invisible white space character was indeed the problem. So again, I don't know how it got there. It didn't seem like a system-generated problem because once I took the space out, you know, the system wasn't putting it back in. So we should be good now, right? You know, let's go through and make sure that there aren't any other questions that have this problem. So where are we in the debugging steps? Okay, so now we're at step 4, and again, I sent it back. And then it crashed again. So I didn't have all of the steps right. I didn't have everything fixed. So I had to go back and make more changes. And then look what we had to go through again. Okay, so now, this time, I put all of the questions in there, all 100 or so questions. I'm like, I want to get all of these taken care of, okay? And I saw something weird as I was going through the questions. There were some weird like icons, emojis, and musical notes. And like, this course has nothing to do with music. Why are there musical notes just showing up randomly? So I did some research on smiley faces and musical notes in text, trying to figure out how to create these characters. And I eventually came across the term alt code. So if you don't know what that is, it's a special way to create non-standard characters, such as like the copyright sign or pound and whatnot, or the euro. If your keypad has the num lock, you turn that on, you hold down the alt key, and then you put in a numerical code, and it produces non-standard characters. All right, so that's what was causing these emoticons and weird things, but also you can create white spaces that way, so that's what was causing the white spaces. So now I knew what was happening. I just went through, I went through all of the questions. Some of them I just copied and pasted into the text editor instead of waiting for it to crash and having to reload again, and eventually got all the questions removed. Okay, so now what happens? So once I got the questions removed, or the text removed, we went through, and the course didn't crash this time with all 100 or so questions, and then again with the random 10 questions. It worked. So now what happens? It was time for me to share and document the lessons learned and with IBM and the government team so that they knew not to use alt codes in the future and what to do if it happened again. Now, as a developer, you'll be worth your weight in gold if you know how to write and communicate and keep up documentations, because, you know, insider secret, a lot of developers don't know how to do that. So, okay. So this is my debugging story, and here's some of the key guidelines. Gather information. If you don't have sufficient information, gather more if you need it. So in my case, that included making more logs. Start small and then go big. So I started with a small set of questions, and then once I got that sort of narrowed down, I did all of the bigger set of questions. Remember that changing directions is normal. A lot of times you'll have to go back to step one, and starting over in the process does not mean that you failed. Okay, so thank you. If you want to get in contact with me, my email address is contact@cloudyheavengames.com. You can also go to cloudyheavengames.com, where I try to upload material to help you learn how to be a better programmer. My Twitter is @cloudyheavengms. And if you want to know more about my games and some of my ebooks that help you learn how to program, go to my itch.io page and look for, on about Monday or so, a free guide for you guys that goes into more detail about how to download, how to debug. Okay, thank you. Thank you.